how can governments emerge stronger and be better prepared for future shocks? What actions can be taken to promote digital engagement of citizens and modernize supply chains? And how does emerging stronger and more resilient rest on a solid foundation of data analytics and system security? I'll explore these questions and so much more with IBM Global Government leaders Tim Paydos and Mike Stone, authors of the IBM Center Report, Emerge Stronger and More Resilient, Responding to COVID-19 and Preparing for Future Shocks. So, Tim, in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, government agencies were dealing with a lot of turbulence, and yet government leaders were able to keep the plane aloft and keep it working through the first two phases of what was predicted to be a three-phase pandemic. Could you elaborate on the phases of the pandemic? And more importantly, what were some of the top challenges being faced then and now?
Governments in particular found themselves right in the center of the storm in reacting to COVID. I mean, COVID affected society at large, but government specifically. And the challenges we saw is, this incredible exploding in demand for services and new citizens or citizens who hadn't really interacted with the government up close and personal prior, or asking for benefits, asking for services. Services Australia, for instance, they had 100,000 people access their website concurrently at 9 a.m. when they went live on unemployment, and it crashed, right? 26 out of 50 states' unemployment systems here in the United States crashed by April 15th, 2020. And so real challenges that government faced. The net result is, citizens have begun, or how you can say, have lost some faith and trust in their societal institutions in general, but government in specific. Recent report says that only 41% of people trust government to do the right thing. So these are real challenges for government. Now, what we saw governments trying to do, and we moved to support them, was to break, the initial phases or the initial days of COVID were completely chaotic, right? And so to simplify it and help governments organize, we sought to break it down into three phases of response. And so phase one would be what we call the emergency response of business continuity phase. That's just keeping the lights on, enabling remote working. All government workers, even in the intelligence side of the world, went to work from home. And just because you have, a laptop and internet access at home doesn't mean you can access your blinking green screen COBOL-based unemployment system. So how do we enable, remote working models, remote learning models? We shipped 450,000 laptops into New York City to help with disadvantaged students who were going home to work to learn at home, but they were unwired at home because they're underprivileged. They didn't have wireless or Wi-Fi, so they needed Verizon cell cards, for instance, in order to run those laptops. So that was the first phase, keep the lights on. Second phase is what we called recovery and rebuild. And that was all around things like deeper analytics to track what was happening with the virus, where it was going, more modernized supply chains, things like contact tracing, vaccine management, and vaccine credentials. And now we're in the third phase, so we can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. There will be surges as we kind of move out of this, but we see the light at the end of the tunnel. And the question that governments are asking themselves now is, how do I emerge stronger and more resilient? Right? I made these investments in modernizing and creating a better citizen experience. I need to maintain that, but I also need to put some governance and control over it so I can prepare for the next big thing, whether that's a climate event or whether it's Godzilla. What's the future shock that we need to prepare for? And are we ready for that? So that's where we find ourselves now, is this emerge stronger and more resilient phase.
And that third phase that we're talking about, like preparing for the future shock, it's going to be inevitable. Something's going to shock the system. And I was wondering, Mike or Tim, what new knowledge, as you reflect on the lessons learned, what are some of the things that government executive leaders need to really think about that are fundamental for transforming how government can pivot if another shock happens, if and when?
Well, let me just jump in on the back of what Tim said there. I mean, one of the key things I think about staying afloat during the pandemic was the fact that against most people's expectations, the bandwidth stood up to it all. So people were able to work remotely in the end, despite the fact that there were also loads of people on Netflix all at the same time, et cetera. So that was one of the really bright sides of this, that the bandwidth that we had available did stand up to it. But there are real challenges that out there, and those challenges, being big challenges, require big solutions. And there are a number of themes that sort of fall out of that as you reflect on it. The first of those was actually really just how swiftly governments were able to respond. Even the slow ones actually caught up pretty quickly. And so there was rapid innovation and modernization, which led to improved agility. Actually, quite impressive. So if that first theme was rapid innovation and agility, then the second core theme that I would reflect on would be the trust and transparency issue that Tim mentioned. Now, if you put aside security and privacy concerns, then it's really easy to innovate and deliver new services. But that's also the way to lose the trust, because when we provide these new services, in new ways, we've got to balance protecting the citizens' rights, their privacy, their personal liberty, and ensure equity across the piece. Then, of course, there's security, and the speed of government responses actually exposed not only existing gaps in security, but created new ones, and those have got to be addressed as we move forward rapidly, one would suggest. And then the fourth area is around the workforce, and the fact that the workforce of yesterday is no longer prepared to be able, with the right skills and means, to be able to deal with the digital transformation that's taken place during the course of the last couple of years, actually a decade's worth of digital transformation almost over a couple of years. And governments are going to really have to invest heavily in addressing that talent challenge.
So embracing the new urgency to harness technology, leading governments scaled to meet demand, as you both pointed out, and delivered new services and supported new ways of actually working. I was hoping to get both you, Tim, and Mike to provide some examples of how governments across the globe leveraged AI to improve citizen services.
So let's put that in the context, and I'll give you some examples of something like citizen care. All right, I'm a citizen, I'm in the state of New York, I'm newly unemployed, my mom's in the hospital, I need some help. What do I need to do, right? And what does that look like from the point of view of state of New York? State of New York needs to predict what the citizen demand is going to be. And when I say citizen demand, not only requests for benefit, but requests for service. So someone's calling into the call center, or they're going down to the office. I need to predict how many people are coming. Who do I need to have on staff? What benefits are they likely going to need? So I'm prepared before they get there with the right staff and the right knowledge to serve them. I then need to automate, the process through serving them, taking as many routine tasks off the plate of the call taker as we can, so that call, when it happens, becomes that much more efficient. I then need to secure the citizen data, right? We're dealing with personal information, all kinds of PII, also family information, health information, and it's very important for the citizens to trust that the state of New York, when I share information with them, that's not going to get out somewhere. And then I need to modernize. So once the citizen and the government agrees that, hey, this is the benefit that you're entitled to, we can actually transact that. We can send that off. A check can be cut and that money can show up in my bank account, right? State of New York, much like many states, they have multiple social services agencies, each running their own programs and even multiple programs with each one of those agencies. And so they undertook a 12-week project to take those 19, they have 19 systems in the state of New York, consolidate those onto an easy-to-read screen that helps the call taker look across all these agencies and determine which benefit, has AI in there to automate that process, recommending based on what the citizen is saying, recommending what benefit that they are entitled to. And this ended up saving the agents about 20 minutes per call. So they went from being able to take 3 calls an hour to 30. So that's a 10 times increase in productivity, happier citizen, lower cost for the state. Another one is state of Rhode Island, very similar. This wasn't in unemployment. This was in their Rhode Island Department of Health. And they started with vaccine management and contact tracing. And very quickly, their call centers were just completely overwhelmed. So many people coming in, where do I get my vaccine? And so many people calling in and saying, okay, we got to do contact tracing. And so the question was, how do we better serve those citizens while we were trying to staff up the number of people we have in the call center? So they adopted a virtual assistant, right? And the virtual assistant is the first line of defense, so to speak. When a citizen reaches out to the state, this can be on the phone, so it can be telephony, or it can be a chat screen on the Rhode Island site. You can go check out RIDO, Rhode Island Department of Health. And when I come in as a citizen, I can ask that virtual assistant questions, and the easy questions and answers, and therefore that call is deflected. They don't have to talk to a human being because they get their answer, for routine questions answered very quickly. So Rhode Island saw an 85% deflection rate, where 85% of the calls were deflected because the citizen was satisfied, and they only had to respond to 15% of the calls where there was something really complex that required, a human assistance. And so again, happier citizens, greater productivity for the state at a lower cost. So those are two examples against the Predict, Automate, Secure, and Modernize that Mike mentioned.
Yeah, terrific examples. Mike?
Yeah, so a couple from me as well. First of all, the Italian Red Cross and Ministry of Health, who used AI to predict ambulance transport times with 98% accuracy. They used predictive analytics based on 200,000 prior records. So, an incredible example there. And then the Department of Veterans Affairs in the US, dealing with huge numbers of increased calls and claims, needed to improve citizen service and at the same time cut their administrative costs. And they used AI and process automation to digitize their incoming benefits packages and correspondence. They actually cut processing time from up to 5 to 60 days to hours. And within just 8 months, they'd got 200 people who'd been previously handling piles of paper retrained and into new positions. So another couple of examples there for you.
Tim, I was hoping that you could elaborate more on what needs to be done to modernize and strengthen the supply chain, to increase its agility and resiliency for future shock.
Right. So I mentioned some of the work that's going on already, and and that work is continuing. It's about really focusing on the supply chain as a web, as a supply chain like fence. It's recognizing that the supply chain is not a serial thing. We kind of think that the supply chain is this, point A to point B, and it's a serial chain that you can see. And that's not the case at all. We saw this when we did a lot of work around vaccine management, when the vaccine started being rolled out. And if you think about vaccine management, you just look at it, for instance, in the context of the United States, okay? So you have the manufacturer, that's Moderna, Pfizer, et cetera. They're creating the vaccine. When they create a lot of vaccine, they issue a birth certificate to that lot, because it's not enough for us to know that this is the Pfizer vaccine. We need to know that this is the Pfizer vaccine from this particular lot, right? In case there's adverse events, or we need to track, effectiveness of different lots, et cetera. That set of vaccine then goes to the federal government for distribution. We did some of that through the National Guard. It might go right to a 3PL provider like a FedEx or UPS or companies like that. It goes to the state government. It may skip the state government completely and go to the local pharmacy or the local retailer, or right to the city. But when it does that, everybody needs to have visibility to that one specific vial, that lot of vaccine as it moves through that supply chain. The feds need to know about it so they can track adverse events. The state governments need to know about it because they need to see where their vaccines are going in the state and who's getting vaccinated. And even different from a mask, the state needs to know which vial went into the arm of which citizen, so that we can, again, track adverse events. So it's very much the key is changing the way we think about the supply chain. It's very much a supply chain web. It's about creating shared visibility across an ecosystem so that we all know what's happening at different nodes in the supply chain, and then automating our response when things change. And of course, making sure we have security over it. So, and the vaccine, there were cases of counterfeit vaccines. So making security over that is important.
So switching gears to the other aspect of your report, which is a call to build an analytic foundation. And Mike, I want to stay with you if you don't mind. Why must public sector leaders build a robust analytic foundation that helps them weather more effectively the black swan or the high impact, low probability events like the pandemic or supply chain disruption?
Well, the heart of all of this is data, and data can be seen as the new gold, the new oil, the new water, whatever's the most precious resource that's out there at any given time. And there are actually experiments going on with companies putting the value of their data on the balance sheet. And yet I know of no organization that makes effective use of more than 20 to 25% of its existing data stocks, which, if you put that another way, means that we're wasting between 75 and 80% of that most valuable resource. And that's before you bring on the entirely new tsunami of data that's going to come as a result of all the sensors that are now being connected to the internet, all of which have the ability to help us with dealing with these low probability events, but only if we're able to exploit that data and get great situational awareness out of it. And for that, we need a robust analytical foundation.
So, Tim, I was wondering, what are some of the key questions most public sector institutions need to address around the idea of understood data? What's some of the guidance you can give them there?
Well, I mean, so a common theme from our discussion today, and by the way, this has been a lot of fun, and I've greatly enjoyed it. But a common theme is data, right? Because you need data to inform your supply chain. You need data to figure out, and predict citizen demand. You need data for situational awareness. And, tie this to my comments about the things that you don't want to do, which is to build the intergalactic thing and hope you get value out of it. The key questions that leaders need to ask is, which data do I need to put under my control? Which data do I need to extract insight from? Because the data is just, voluminous. There's too much to keep track of, and too much. You can very easily get distracted by data that is not value add to what you're trying to do. So the first question is, what's your mission? And what data do you need to effectively, prosecute that mission? So what data do you need for situational awareness and creating transparency? You need to understand, in some cases, the potential policy impacts or the impact of the policies that you're developing at a policy level on the economy, on personal liberty, on equity, and maybe you do that through modeling. And so what kind of data you need to bring to address that? How do you ensure that you're targeting, you're focused on equity, you're targeting the right communities, underserved communities? A big thing right now, and we're seeing this play out certainly in Ukraine, is the value of open source intelligence. So not only data that you have under your control in your enterprise or across your ecosystem, but what's being said out there on social media. A lot of the intel in Ukraine right now, we're doing some work, for instance, with the Institute for Study of Warfare, and they're the ones who create the maps that you're seeing on the news periodically. So if you're looking at NBC News or whatever your news channel of choice is, you'll see credited down below the Institute for the Study of Warfare. They're pulling all of that information about, where battles are taking place, where troop movements are happening, et cetera. They're doing that all through open source. So how do you embrace and leverage open source? Now, a lot of this comes down to, what are the standards for exchanging data? How are we going to manage this data and do it in a way that serves our mission? But it all comes down to the mission and the use case. What data is important to you in order to prosecute your mission?
This has been a special edition of the Business of Government Hour, a conversation with authors, with IBM Global Government leaders Mike Stone and Tim Paydos, authors of the IBM Center Report, Emerge Stronger and More Resilient, Responding to COVID-19 and Preparing for Future Shocks. You can download this report and all center reports at businessofgovernment.org. Be sure to join us next time for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government leadership and its effectiveness. Until then, subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at Podcast One, iTunes, or on your favorite podcast app. And as always at businessofgovernment.org.